My son Luke looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mom, maybe it's time you found your own place." I nodded, smiled, and walked upstairs to pack. 3 weeks later, I was sipping champagne on a terrace overlooking the Mediterranean Sea in Monaco, while he was frantically calling about the foreclosure notice on what used to be our family home. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Caroline Foster, but everyone's called me Carrie since I was a little girl growing up in Connecticut. At 68 years old, I never expected to reinvent myself, but life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. 5 years ago, my husband Henry passed away suddenly from a heart attack. We'd been married for 40 years, raised our son Luke together, and built a beautiful life in our colonial home with its wraparound porch and garden that had been featured twice in the local newspaper. Henry had always handled our finances, investments, retirement accounts, insurance policies while I managed our home and taught piano to neighborhood children. When Henry died, the grief was overwhelming. I wandered through our 4-bedroom house like a ghost, touching the walls he'd helped me paint, sitting in his favorite chair, and tending to the roses we'd planted together on our 30th anniversary. The house felt impossibly empty without him. That's when Luke suggested I transfer the house to his name. "For tax purposes, Mom," he explained. "It'll make things easier down the road." At 35, Luke had his father's tall frame and my stubborn jawline. He worked in marketing for a tech company and had recently gotten engaged to Rachel Peterson, a stylish woman who worked in fashion merchandising. I trusted my son completely. He was my only child, the center of my world since the day he was born. So I signed the papers without reading them carefully. After all, family takes care of family, that's what Henry and I had always believed. 18 months ago, Luke and Rachel moved in with me. "Just temporarily," Luke assured me. "While we save for our perfect home." I was thrilled to have company again, to hear laughter echoing through the rooms, to have someone to cook for. I welcomed them with open arms, rearranging my crafting supplies to give them the guest bedroom, adjusting my routines to accommodate theirs. The first signs of trouble were subtle. My sewing machine and crafting table were relocated to the basement without discussion. The living room furniture was rearranged while I was volunteering at the animal shelter. Small changes that didn't seem worth mentioning, but left me feeling increasingly displaced in my own home. One morning, I stood in the doorway of what had been the guest bedroom, watching Rachel arrange her extensive makeup collection across the antique vanity that had belonged to my grandmother. Morning sunlight caught her crystal bottles and gold compacts, creating little rainbows on the wallpaper I'd hung myself 25 years earlier. "Morning, Carrie," Rachel chirped without looking up from her reflection. She was applying some sort of cream that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Everything about Rachel was precise. Her sleek black hair fell in calculated waves. Her workout clothes bore designer labels, and even her smile seemed measured for maximum impact. "Good morning, sweetheart," I replied, stepping into the room that used to house my piano and crafting supplies. "I was thinking," Rachel continued, now applying mascara with the concentration of an artist, "we should probably talk about the living situation." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "Oh, what about it?" She turned then, her dark eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "Well, Luke and I have been discussing it, and we think it might be time for some changes. We're not kids anymore, you know. We need our space to grow as a couple." I gripped the doorframe a little tighter. "Of course. Have you found somewhere you'd like to move?" Rachel's laugh was like wind chimes in a hurricane, pretty, but sharp. "Oh, Carrie, you're so sweet." "No, we were thinking more along the lines of, well, this is Luke's childhood home, right? His inheritance, technically. And you've had such a good run here. But maybe it's time you found your own little place. Something more suitable for a woman your age." The words hit me like ice water. A woman my age. I was 68, not 98. I'd maintained this house, this 4-bedroom colonial with its wraparound porch and meticulously tended gardens for 30 years. I'd painted every room, refinished every floor, nursed every piece of furniture back to life when it showed wear. "This is my home, Rachel," I said quietly. "Well, technically." She stood up, smoothing her leggings that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. It's in Luke's name now, isn't it? Since the transfer after Henry died? My throat closed. She was right. After Henry's heart attack, when grief had been so overwhelming, I'd signed those papers without really reading them. I just hadn't imagined my own son would use them against me. I just think, Rachel continued, now applying lip gloss, it would be better for everyone if you found your own space. Something smaller, easier to manage. There are some lovely senior communities nearby. Senior communities. The phrase made my skin crawl. I wasn't ready for organized craft time and early bird dinners. I still taught piano lessons to neighborhood kids, maintained a garden that the local newspaper had featured twice, and volunteered at the animal shelter every Tuesday and Thursday. "Where is Luke?" I asked. "Shower," she replied, capping her lip gloss with a decisive click. "But we've already talked about this." "Carrie." "He agrees. It's time." I stood there for another moment, watching her adjust her workout top in the mirror, completely comfortable in my bedroom, in my house, discussing my future like I was a piece of furniture that no longer fit the decor. I walked downstairs to the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors I'd had refinished just 2 years ago. The morning sun streamed through the windows above the sink, illuminating the herb garden I'd planted in neat rows along the windowsill: basil, rosemary, thyme, oregano, all thriving under my care. The coffee maker gurgled to life as I pressed the start button, the sound as familiar as my own heartbeat. This kitchen had been the heart of our family for 3 decades. I'd made thousands of meals here, packed countless lunches, hosted birthday parties and holiday dinners. The scratches on the butcher block island told stories. The growth marks on the doorframe charted Luke's journey from toddler to man. "Morning, Mom." I turned to find Luke in the doorway, hair still damp from the shower, wearing the expensive athleisure clothes that seemed to be his uniform these days. "Morning, honey." I poured 2 cups of coffee, adding cream to his just the way he'd liked it since he was 12. "Sleep well." "Yeah, thanks." He accepted the mug but didn't meet my eyes. "Listen, Mom, Rachel mentioned she talked to you about the living situation." I nodded, taking a careful sip of my coffee. It was perfect, rich and smooth from beans I ordered from a small roaster in Vermont, another luxury I allowed myself. "She's right, you know," Luke continued, leaning against the counter I'd had installed when he was in high school. "This place is getting too big for you to handle alone." "I handle it just fine," I said quietly. "Mom, come on. The gutters need cleaning. The deck needs to be power washed. And don't get me started on the yard work. It's too much for someone your age." Someone your age. The same phrase Rachel had used. Like 68 was ancient. Like I was tottering around with a walker instead of running 5 miles every other morning. "I maintain this house perfectly well," I said, my voice still calm but with an edge creeping in. "The gutters were cleaned last month by the same service I've used for 5 years. The deck gets power washed every spring. The gardens are featured in the local paper regularly." Luke shifted uncomfortably. "It's not about that. It's about us having space to build our life together. Rachel wants to start a family soon, and we need room to grow. This house has 4 bedrooms, I pointed out. "Mom!" His tone was the same one he'd used as a teenager when he thought I was being unreasonable. "We're adults. We can't live with my mother forever." "Then move out," I said simply. He stared at me like I'd suggested he fly to the moon. "Move out, Mom. This is my house now. My inheritance." "Dad left it to me." "Dad left it to both of us," I corrected. "I transferred it to your name for tax purposes. There's a difference. Look." Luke set down his coffee mug with more force than necessary. "We've been patient. We've lived here for 1.5 years, saving money, contributing to expenses. They'd paid for groceries exactly twice and had never once offered to help with the mortgage, utilities, or maintenance. I'd been too proud to ask, too grateful for their company in the house that had felt cavernous and empty after Henry died. "I think," he continued, "it would be best for everyone if you found your own place, something more appropriate. Maybe one of those nice senior living communities where you'd have people your own age to socialize with." There it was again, people my own age, as if I was too old, too irrelevant. too much of a burden to exist in the same space as their young, vibrant lives. I see, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. There are some really nice places. Mom, we've been looking into it. Sunrise Manor has a great reputation, and it's only 20 minutes away. You'd have your own apartment, activities, meal plans. It might be exactly what you need. What I need. They'd decided what I needed without asking me. They'd researched senior living facilities for me while living in my house, sleeping in my guest room, using my utilities, eating food I bought. And if I don't want to move, I asked. Luke's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I saw something in his face that reminded me uncomfortably of his father during his worst moments. Henry had been a good man, but he'd had a temper when things didn't go his way. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. The house is in my name. Legally, it's mine now. I'm trying to be reasonable here. But if you're going to be stubborn about it... He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. My own son was threatening to evict me from the house I'd lived in for 30 years, the house where I'd raised him, loved him, sacrificed for him. I understand, I said quietly. Relief flooded his features. Good. We'll help you look at places, and we'll make sure you're settled somewhere nice. It'll be an adventure, right? A fresh start. A fresh start. At 68, after 30 years in the same house, he thought I needed a fresh start because it would be convenient for him. How long do I have? I asked. Well, we were thinking maybe by the end of the month. Rachel found this amazing interior designer who can help us redesign the space, and she's available to start in February. End of the month. It was January 15th. They were giving me 2 weeks to uproot my entire life so they could redecorate my house. Of course, I said. 2 weeks should be plenty of time. Luke beamed like I'd just agreed to give him a present instead of my entire life. You're the best, Mom. I knew you'd understand. And hey, maybe this is exactly what you need. Some independence? A chance to meet new people? Independence. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I'd been independent my entire life. I'd raised him mostly alone while Henry worked 60-hour weeks building his construction business. I'd managed the household finances, maintained the property, and built a life that I loved. Now they were telling me I needed independence while simultaneously making me homeless. I should probably start looking at places today, I said. Great idea. Want me to call Sunrise Manor for you, set up a tour? No, thank you. I'll handle it myself. He kissed my cheek like nothing had changed, like he hadn't just ripped my life apart over morning coffee. Love you, Mom. Love you too, sweetheart. I watched him leave the kitchen, probably to report back to Rachel that the difficult conversation had gone better than expected, that I'd been reasonable and understanding, that they could move forward with their plans without any messy emotional scenes. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by 30 years of memories, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, more dangerous. Clarity. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden I'd spent decades cultivating. The winter roses were dormant now, but come spring, they'd bloom in shades of pink and white and deep red. I'd planted them the year Luke graduated high school, thinking about how they'd be here long after I was gone. A legacy of beauty for future generations to enjoy. I'd been wrong about a lot of things. It seemed... My phone buzzed on this counter, a text from my neighbor, Olivia Matthews, asking if I wanted to join her for yoga class this afternoon. Olivia was 72, ran marathons, and had more energy than most people half her age. She'd laugh at the suggestion that 68 was too old for anything except organized craft time and early bird dinners. I texted her back. Rain check. I have some research to do. Research, that's what I called it when I was planning something that required careful thought and preparation, like when I researched the best schools for Luke, or the right contractors for the kitchen renovation, or the perfect roses for the garden. Now I was researching something else entirely. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, cursor blinking in the search bar like a question mark. I thought about typing senior living facilities or apartments for rent, or any of the things a reasonable woman in my situation would search for. Instead, I typed something else entirely: real estate market analysis, property values, current year, then how to sell house quickly, best price, and finally, cost of living Monaco, France. The last search surprised even me. Monaco had been a joke between Henry and me, a fantasy we'd spin when the bills piled up or the winter felt too long. When we're rich, he'd say, we'll have a little place in Monaco, drink champagne and watch the sunset over the Mediterranean. It had been a dream, nothing more. But dreams had a way of becoming possibilities when the people you loved most decided you were inconvenient. I spent the next 3 hours reading. Property values in our neighborhood had skyrocketed over the past 5 years. The house that Henry and I had bought for $85,000 in 1994 was now worth over $400,000, maybe more, depending on the market. Monaco was expensive, certainly, but not impossibly so for someone with substantial assets. And I had more assets than Luke realized. The house wasn't the only thing Henry had left me. There was his life insurance policy, the business he'd built and sold just before his death, the investments we'd made together over 30 years of marriage. I'd been careful with money my entire life, and Henry had been smart about planning for the future. Luke thought the house was his inheritance, but he was wrong about that, too. The will had been very clear. Everything went to me first, then to him upon my death. The house transfer had been for tax purposes only, but the rest of the estate was still mine. All of it. By noon, I had a plan forming. By 1:00, I was on the phone with a real estate agent. Mrs. Foster, said Jennifer Sullivan, the agent who'd sold 3 houses on our street in the past year. I'd be delighted to help you. When were you thinking of listing? As soon as possible. I said, I need to move quickly. Of course. The market is very hot right now, especially for properties in your neighborhood. Well-maintained colonials are in high demand. When can I come take a look? This afternoon. There was a pause. That's quite fast. Is everything all right? Everything's perfect, he said, and for the first time in months, I meant it. I'm ready for an adventure. Jennifer arrived at 300 sharp, an efficient woman in her 40s with a measuring tape and a keen eye for detail. She walked through the house like she was conducting an orchestra, noting crown molding and hardwood floors and the updated kitchen with professional appreciation. This is remarkable, she said, standing in the living room where afternoon light streamed through windows I'd cleaned just last week. You've maintained this beautifully. The craftsmanship is exceptional. Thank you. May I ask what prompted the decision to sell? Are you downsizing? Something like that, I said. I'm relocating internationally. Her eyebrows rose. How exciting! Where to? Monaco. If she was surprised, she hid it well. Lovely. I have a colleague who relocated to Nice a few years ago. The Mediterranean lifestyle is supposed to be wonderful for retirement. Retirement. Everyone kept using that word like it was a box I should climb into quietly. I'd never felt less like retiring in my life. What do you think the house might sell for? I asked. Jennifer consulted her notes, did some mental calculations. Given the neighborhood, the condition, the size, and current market conditions, I'd estimate somewhere between $420,000 and $450,000, possibly more if we get multiple offers, which I expect we will. $450,000 more than 5 times what we'd paid for it, enough to buy a beautiful apartment in Monaco with money left over for whatever came next. How quickly could we close, I asked. With the right buyer, potentially within 30 days, cash offers could move even faster. 30 days. Luke had given me 2 weeks to disappear quietly into a senior living facility. I was giving myself a month to disappear entirely, just not in the direction he expected. Let's do it, I said. Jennifer smiled. I'll draw up the paperwork tonight. We can have you listed by Friday if you're comfortable with that timeline. Perfect. After she left, I sat in the kitchen with my laptop and a legal pad, making lists, things to keep, things to sell, things to donate, phone calls to make, accounts to close, arrangements to handle. It was remarkable how much life you could dismantle when you put your mind to it. Luke and Rachel came home around 6:00, chattering about their day at the gym and their dinner plans with friends. They moved through the house like they already owned it, which technically they did, but emotionally felt like theft. How was the house hunting, Mom? Luke asked, grabbing a bottle of water from the refrigerator. Very productive, I said. I should have news soon. Great, I told you this would work out. Change can be good, right? Absolutely, I agreed. Change can be exactly what you need. That night, I lay in the bed I'd shared with Henry for 25 years, staring at the ceiling and listening to Luke and Rachel's voices drift up from the living room below. They were watching a movie, sharing a bottle of wine, making plans for the furniture they wanted to buy once I was gone. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. Right now, I felt something much more powerful. Freedom. For the first time in 5 years since Henry's death, I wasn't worried about being alone. I wasn't afraid of change. I was 68 years old, healthy, financially independent, and about to embark on the biggest adventure of my life. Monaco was waiting, and so was I. The next morning, I woke before dawn and made myself a cup of coffee with beans from Vermont, probably for the last time in this kitchen. I sat at the table where I'd helped Luke with homework, where Henry and I had planned our future, where I'd eaten 10,000 meals over 30 years. In 6 hours, Jennifer would arrive with listing papers. In 2 weeks, Luke expected me to be settled into Sunrise Manor, playing bridge and complaining about the food. In a month, if everything went according to my plan, I'd be watching the sunrise over the Mediterranean, sipping café au lait, and discovering what came next. I raised my coffee mug in a small toast to the empty kitchen. To new beginnings, I whispered, and somewhere in the distance, I could swear I heard Henry laughing. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp January air that made everything feel sharp and clear. I stood at my bedroom window, watching Luke load his golf clubs into the back of his BMW, the same BMW I'd helped him finance when he graduated from business school. Rachel emerged from the house in yoga attire that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments, her hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. They were going to their respective Friday routines golf for him, Pilates and spa treatments for her, while I would be signing papers that would change everything. Jennifer Sullivan was due at 10 Huzzers sharp with the listing agreement, and by noon, my house would be officially on the market. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a navy blue dress that Henry had always said brought out my eyes, paired with the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 20th anniversary. If I was going to sign away 30 years of my life, I was going to do it looking like the woman I'd always been underneath the convenient doormat everyone seemed to think I'd become. The coffee tasted different that morning, charged with possibility. I'd barely slept, not from anxiety, but from excitement. For months after Henry's death, I'd felt like I was sleepwalking through life, going through the motions of living without really being present. But yesterday, when Luke had stood in my kitchen and told me to find my own place, something had awakened in me that I hadn't felt in years. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia next door. Saw the real estate agent's car yesterday. Everything okay? I typed back. Big changes coming, good ones. She responded immediately. Lunch tomorrow, I need details. Absolutely. Olivia had been my neighbor for 15 years, and my friend for just as long. She'd been the one to bring casseroles after Henry's funeral, the one who'd convinced me to start running again when grief had me barely leaving the house. If anyone would understand what I was about to do, it would be Olivia. At exactly 10:00, Jennifer's silver sedan pulled into my driveway. She emerged with a leather portfolio and the kind of confident stride that came from years of successful deals. I met her at the door before she could ring the bell. "Mrs. Foster," she said warmly, "are you ready to make this official?" "More ready than I've been for anything in years." We settled at my kitchen table, the same table where Luke had delivered his ultimatum just yesterday. Jennifer spread out papers with the efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times, explaining each section with patience and clarity. "The listing price will be $435,000, she said, pointing to a figure that still made my breath catch. "Based on comparable sales and current market conditions, I'm confident we'll receive multiple offers within the first week. And how quickly could we close with a cash buyer?" "Potentially 3 weeks, with financing, 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the buyer's situation." She looked up from the papers. Are you certain about the timeline? Most sellers prefer a longer closing period to make arrangements. I'm certain, I sadly said, signing my name with a flourish that surprised us both. The faster, the better. After Jennifer left, I sat in the quiet house and tried to imagine Luke's reaction when he discovered what I'd done. He'd be furious, certainly, but also confused. In his mind, I was supposed to shuffle quietly into assisted living, grateful for whatever small kindness he threw my way. The idea that I might have my own plans, my own resources, my own agency, had never occurred to him. I spent the afternoon making phone calls first to my financial advisor, Richard Chen, who'd been managing Henry's investments since before I was widowed. Carrie, Richard's voice was warm with genuine affection. How are you holding up? Better than I've been in months, I said truthfully. Richard, I need to discuss my portfolio. I'm making some major life changes, of course. When would you like to come in? Today, if possible. There was a pause. That sounds urgent. Is everything all right? Everything's perfect. I'm moving to Monaco. The silence on his end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Monaco, he repeated finally. As in the French Riviera Monaco. That's the one. Well, Richard cleared his throat. That's certainly a change. Let me move some things around. Can you be here at 3 Huzuru? Richard's office was in a glass tower downtown, the kind of building that made you feel important just by walking through the lobby. I'd been there a dozen times over the years, but always with Henry, always following his lead in financial discussions. Today I walked in alone, wearing my navy dress and my confidence like armor. Carrie, Richard stood as his assistant showed me in. You look wonderful. Different somehow. I feel different, I said, settling into the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. Tell me about my financial position. Richard. All of it. For the next hour, Richard walked me through numbers that made my head spin in the best possible way. Henry's life insurance policy, the proceeds from the sale of his construction business, 30 years of careful investments and retirement savings. When he finished, I stared at the final figure on his computer screen and felt something like vertigo. $2.1 million, I said slowly. Plus whatever you receive from the house sale, Richard confirmed. Your husband was very smart about money, Carrie, and very protective of your future. Henry had always handled our finances, claiming he enjoyed the research and planning while I focused on other things. I'd been content to let him, trusting his judgment, never realizing exactly how well he'd provided for me. What would I need to live comfortably in Monaco? I asked. Richard pulled up something on his computer, made some calculations. Obviously, it depends on your lifestyle, but for a comfortable apartment and reasonable living expenses, probably $60,000 to $80,000 a year. Your portfolio could generate that indefinitely without touching the principal. And if I wanted to buy property there, well, Monaco real estate is expensive, but with your assets and the house sale, you could certainly afford something nice. A good apartment might run anywhere from $500,000 to several million, depending on location and size. I thought about the pictures I'd been looking at online all morning, apartments with terraces overlooking the harbor, places where I could have my morning coffee while watching yachts drift in and out of port where no one would suggest I needed to find somewhere more appropriate for someone my age. Richard, I said, I want to liquidate everything that needs to be liquidated and transfer the rest to accounts I can access internationally. How quickly can that happen? Carrie, he leaned forward, his expression concerned. This is a very big decision. Have you discussed it with Luke? Maybe we should know, I interrupted firmly. This is my decision, my money, my life. I don't need anyone's permission to live it. Richard studied my face for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're absolutely right. I apologize. Old habits, I suppose. Henry used to make most of the decisions. Henry's gone, I said gently but firmly. I'm not. We spent another hour working out details, wire transfers, currency exchanges, international banking relationships. By the time I left his office, I had a clear timeline. Within 2 weeks, I could have access to funds anywhere in the world. That evening, I cooked dinner for 3, the way I had every night since Luke and Rachel had moved in. chicken marsala with roasted vegetables, one of Luke's childhood favorites. I set the table with the good china, lit candles, opened a bottle of wine from the collection Henry and I had been saving for special occasions. "This is nice, Mom," Luke said when they sat down. "What's the occasion? I wanted to cook for you while I still can," I said, serving him a generous portion. "Once I move, we won't have dinners like this very often." Rachel took a small serving of vegetables and ignored the chicken entirely. "Have you looked at any places yet?" "I have," I said truthfully. "The options are quite exciting." "See, I told you this would be good for you," Luke said, cutting into his chicken with enthusiasm. "A chance to try something new. Meet people your own age." People my own age. There was that phrase again, like aging was a contagious disease that required quarantine. "I've been thinking about what you said," I continued, refilling their wine glasses, "about needing space to grow as a couple. You're absolutely right. Young marrieds need privacy, room to build their own traditions." Rachel smiled, the first genuine smile she'd directed at me in months. "Exactly. Nothing personal. Of course. You're wonderful. Carrie. It's just that we're at different stages of life." Different stages. As if life was a game of Monopoly, and I'd somehow landed on the nursing home square while they were still collecting $200 for passing go. "I understand completely," I said. "In fact, I've already started making arrangements." Luke looked up from his plate, surprised. "Really? That was fast?" "Well, you said end of the month. I didn't want to hold up your plans." "Mom, you're being so reasonable about this," Luke said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I was worried you might be upset." Upset. The word sat between us like a landmine, waiting to explode. I squeezed his hand back, memorizing the warmth of it, the way his fingers had felt when he was small and afraid of thunderstorms. "Why would I be upset about an adventure?" I asked. After dinner, while they watched television in the living room, I cleaned the kitchen and thought about all the meals I'd prepared in this space. Birthday cakes and holiday feasts, quick breakfasts before school, late-night snacks when Luke brought friends home from college. The kitchen held more memories than any other room in the house, and I was surprised to realize I felt ready to leave them behind. The next morning brought the first showing. Jennifer had warned me there would be interest, but I was still amazed when she called at 800 a.m. to schedule 3 appointments for that afternoon. "The market is even hotter than I expected," she said. "I've had 6 calls since the listing went live this morning. We might want to consider a bidding war strategy." "Whatever you think is best," I said, watching Luke through the window as he loaded his golf clubs again. Saturday morning golf was sacred to him, had been since college. Some traditions apparently were worth preserving. I spent the morning boxing up personal items, starting with the photos that lined the hallway. 30 years of family pictures, Luke's school achievements, Henry's business awards, vacation snapshots from trips we'd taken when money was tight, but our dreams were big. Each picture told a story, and together they told the story of a life well lived, even if it was ending in a way I'd never expected. The doorbell rang at exactly noon. Olivia stood on my porch with a bottle of wine and an expression of barely contained curiosity. "All right," she said, following me into the kitchen. "Spill everything. Jennifer Sullivan's car. Real estate signs going up Monday. And you looking like the cat who ate the canary. What's happening?" I poured 2 glasses of wine and told her everything. Luke's ultimatum, Rachel's casual cruelty, my decision to sell the house and move to Monaco. Olivia listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to delight to something approaching awe. "Monaco," she repeated when I finished. "You're really going to do it?" "I'm really going to do it." "What about Luke? What will you tell him?" I sipped my wine, considering the truth. "Eventually, he's going to be furious." "He's going to be a lot of things," she agreed. "But that's not my problem anymore." Olivia raised her glass. "To Caroline Foster," she said solemnly, "who taught me that it's never too late to choose yourself." The first potential buyers arrived at 200, a young couple with a baby looking for space to grow their family. They walked through the house with reverence, commenting on the original hardwood floors, the updated kitchen, the mature landscaping. When they left, they were holding hands and whispering about offers. The second showing brought an investor, a man in an expensive suit who measured rooms and calculated rental potential. He was polite but clinical, seeing square footage and profit margins instead of a home where love had lived for 30 years. The third couple arrived just as the sun was setting, casting golden light through the windows I'd cleaned that morning. They were older, maybe early 50s, and they moved through the house the way Henry and I had when we'd first seen it, with wonder, with possibility, with dreams. "The garden is extraordinary," the woman said, looking out at the flower beds I'd planted and tended for 3 decades. "You can see the care that's gone into every detail." "Someone loved this house," her husband agreed, running his hand along the stair banister Henry had refinished by hand. "You can feel it. When they left, I knew they would be the ones, not because of money, though Jennifer assured me they were qualified buyers, but because they would love the house the way it deserved to be loved." That night, I sat in my bedroom with my laptop, researching apartments in Monaco with the intensity of a scholar. The pictures were breathtaking terraces overlooking the Mediterranean, elegant rooms with French doors and marble floors, buildings with concierge services and rooftop gardens. I bookmarked my favorites, calculating costs, imagining myself in each space. One apartment in particular caught my attention. It was on the 4th floor of a Belle Époque building near the harbor, with a wraparound terrace that offered views of both the sea and the Prince's Palace. The listing photos showed herringbone floors, tall windows with gauzy curtains, a kitchen that was compact but elegant. It was available for immediate occupancy, furnished or unfurnished, for $6,000 per month. I did the math quickly. At current exchange rates, that was about $6,500 monthly. Expensive by any measure, but well within my means and temporary until I could find something to purchase. I was reaching for my phone to call the rental agent when I heard voices downstairs. Luke and Rachel were talking in the kitchen, their words drifting up through the heating vents. "Perfect timing," Luke was saying. "She's being so cooperative about everything." "I was worried she'd make a scene," Rachel replied. "You know how emotional older women can get about change." Emotional older women. I set down my phone and moved closer to the vent, my cheeks burning. "She's always been reasonable," Luke said. "Dad used to say she was the most practical woman he'd ever met. She'll be fine once she settles in somewhere appropriate." Somewhere appropriate, the phrase that had haunted me for days, that had driven me to research real estate markets and international banking and the cost of living in one of the world's most expensive places. "I just can't wait to have our own space," Rachel continued. "I've already been looking at furniture. That farmhouse style is so outdated. I'm thinking more modern, minimalist, clean lines." Clean lines. She wanted to erase every trace of the life Henry and I had built here. Replace our comfortable lived-in home with something that looked like a magazine spread. "Whatever you want, babe," Luke said. "It's our house now." Our house now. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were untrue legally, but because of how easily he'd dismissed 30 years of my life, my memories, my love for this place. I moved away from the vent and sat back down at my laptop. The Monaco apartment was still glowing on my screen, warm lights spilling across that wraparound terrace, promising a life where no one would call me emotional or suggest I needed somewhere more appropriate. I picked up my phone and dialed the international number listed on the rental website. It was the middle of the night in Monaco, but the call went to a service that promised to connect me with an agent within 24 hours. "This is Caroline Foster," I said when the automated system prompted me to leave a message. "I'm calling about the apartment on Avenue Saint Charles. I'd like to arrange a virtual tour as soon as possible. I'm prepared to wire the first month's rent and security deposit immediately upon approval." I hung up and stared at the phone, my heart beating fast with something that felt remarkably like joy. Downstairs, Luke and Rachel were still planning their takeover of my life, still discussing paint colors and furniture purchases, and all the ways they would improve upon what Henry and I had created. Let them plan. Let them dream. Let them count on their convenient assumption that I would disappear quietly into whatever corner they designated for me. They were about to learn that Caroline Foster had some plans of her own. Sunday morning brought snow, the first real snowfall of the winter. dusting the garden I'd tended for 30 years with a blanket of white that made everything look new and clean. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching Luke shovel the driveway with the same methodical precision he'd inherited from his father. He was a good man in many ways, I reminded myself, kind to animals, generous with his friends, smart about business, but somewhere along the way, he'd learned to see me as an obligation rather than a person, a problem to be managed rather than a mother to be cherished. I wasn't sure when that shift had happened, but I was certain I didn't want to spend whatever years I had left trying to earn back his respect. My phone rang just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee, an international number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Foster. The voice was female, accented with the crisp precision of educated French. This is Celeste Dubois from Riviera Properties. You called about the apartment on Avenue Saint-Charles. Yes, I said, my pulse quickening. Thank you for calling back so quickly. Of course, I have reviewed your inquiry, and I must say, your timing is excellent. The apartment is quite special, and we have had very little interest due to the season. Most people prefer to relocate to Monaco in spring or summer. I'm not most people, I said. Celeste laughed, a warm sound that carried across the ocean. I can arrange a virtual tour this afternoon if you are available. The property is furnished with antiques and modern amenities. Very elegant, very comfortable. That would be perfect. Excellent. I will send you a link at 3:00 your time. May I ask what brings you to Monaco in winter? I looked out at Luke, still shoveling snow with determined strokes, and smiled. A fresh start, I said. The virtual tour was everything I'd hoped for, and more. Celeste walked me through the apartment with her phone, showing me rooms filled with natural light, the terrace with its stunning views, the compact but efficient kitchen with modern appliances, and a breakfast nook that overlooked the harbor. The building has a concierge service, Celeste explained, and the location is quite convenient. Walking distance to the casino, the palace, excellent restaurants and shopping, very safe, very quiet. It's perfect, I said, and I meant it. What do I need to do to secure it? First month's rent, security deposit, and proof of financial stability. Given that you are international, I will need bank statements and references. I can have all of that to you by tomorrow morning. Wonderful. When would you like to take possession? I thought about Luke's timeline, about the end of January deadline he'd given me to disappear from his life. February 1st, if possible. Absolutely possible. I will prepare the lease agreement immediately. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the photos Celeste had texted me. My kitchen, my apartment, my new life waiting for me on the French Riviera like a gift I'd never dared to imagine. That evening, we had dinner as a family one more time. I made pot roast, another of Luke's favorites, and we talked about safe things, the weather, the news, Rachel's latest yoga instructor certification program, normal conversation, the kind we'd been having for months while they planned to evict me and I planned to disappear. Mom, Luke said as I was clearing the dessert plates, I've been thinking about this move of yours. Maybe we should go look at some places together next week. Make sure you find somewhere really nice. I paused with the plates in my hands, looking down at my son's face. He was trying to be kind in his way, trying to assuage whatever guilt he felt about displacing me by helping me find a suitable replacement for the life he was taking away. That's sweet of you, I said, but I've already found somewhere perfect. Really where? It's a surprise, I said, carrying the plates to the sink. But I think you'll be very surprised by my choice. Monday morning brought the call I'd been expecting. Jennifer Sullivan, her voice bright with excitement. Carrie, we have 3 offers, all above asking price. Tell me. The young couple with the baby offered $440,000. The investor went to $450,000, and the older couple, the Reynoldses, offered $465,000 with a personal letter. $465,000, nearly twice what Luke thought the house was worth, enough to buy my Monaco apartment outright and still have money left over for whatever came next. The Reynoldses, I said without hesitation. I was hoping you'd say that. They seem like the kind of people who would love this house the way it deserves. When can we close? They're offering cash, no financing contingencies. We could close in 2 weeks if you're ready. 2 weeks. Exactly the timeline Luke had given me to find somewhere appropriate for someone my age. Let's do it, I said. That afternoon, I drove to Richard Chen's office to sign more papers, international wire transfers, currency exchanges, the complex dance of moving a life's worth of assets across an ocean. Richard had overcome his initial surprise and thrown himself into the logistics with professional enthusiasm. "You're going to love Monaco," he said, reviewing the final documents. "I have a client who keeps a yacht there. Says it's one of the most beautiful places on Earth. I can't wait to find out for myself. When do you leave? January 31st. That's next week. That's next week, I agreed. I spent the evening packing, starting with the things I absolutely couldn't leave behind. Photo albums, a few pieces of jewelry, some books that had been favorites for years. It was surprising how little seemed essential when you were starting over. How much of what we call necessary was really just familiar. Luke and Rachel were out at some social function, a gallery opening, or wine tasting. One of the cultural events that filled their calendars, but somehow never included me. I was glad for the privacy, for the chance to say goodbye to the house without an audience. I walked through each room, touching surfaces Henry and I had chosen together, walls we'd painted, floors we'd refinished. The house held our history in every corner, but I realized I was taking the important parts with me anyway. The memories, the love, the knowledge that we'd built something beautiful together. The new owners would make their own memories here, paint new colors, arrange different furniture, plant their own flowers in the garden. That was how it should be. Houses were meant to be loved, not preserved like museums. Tuesday brought a flurry of activity, closing documents, moving company estimates, airline reservations. I was amazed how quickly a life could be dismantled when you put your mind to it. How many phone calls it took to extract yourself from 30 years of roots. I called the local animal shelter where I'd volunteered every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 3 years. "Caroline," said Maria, the shelter director, "please tell me you're not calling to quit." "I'm afraid I am. I'm relocating internationally." "What, where?" "Monaco." There was a long pause. "Did you win the lottery?" "Something like that," I said, smiling. "But I'll miss our Tuesday walks with the dogs. They'll miss you too. You've been one of our most dedicated volunteers." Dedicated. The word stuck with me after I hung up. I'd been dedicated to a lot of things over the years: my marriage, my son, my home, my community. But I'd never been dedicated to myself, to my own happiness, to my own dreams. That was about to change. Wednesday evening, Luke and Rachel returned from their respective days to find me in the living room with my laptop and a glass of wine, researching flights to Nice. "Working on something interesting?" Luke asked, settling into the armchair that had been his father's favorite spot. "Travel arrangements," I said truthfully. "Oh, for visiting Sunrise Manor. That's smart. Getting familiar with the area." I looked at my son, really looked at him, trying to memorize his face before everything changed between us forever. He was handsome in the way Henry had been at that age, with kind eyes and an easy smile. But there was an entitlement there, too. A casual assumption that the world would arrange itself around his convenience. "Something like that," I said. Thursday brought the closing. I sat in a conference room with the Reynoldses, Jennifer Sullivan, 2 lawyers, and a pile of papers that would transfer ownership of my life to strangers who promised to love it well. Eleanor Reynolds, whose name was Ellie, had tears in her eyes as she signed the final documents. "We'll take such good care of it," she promised me. "Your garden especially. I can see how much love you put into every detail." "I know you will," I said, and I meant it. The house would be happy with them. It would be home to someone again, instead of just a showcase for Rachel's minimalist aesthetic. When it was over, I held a cashier's check for $465,000 minus Jennifer's commission, more money than I'd ever held in my hands, enough to buy freedom in any currency. "What will you do now?" Ellie Reynolds asked as we walked out together. "Start over," I said. "At 68, I'm starting completely over." "How exciting," she said, and she sounded like she meant it. "I hope I have your courage when I'm your age." Your age. This time, The phrase didn't sting. This time it sounded like a badge of honor. That evening, I cooked one last meal in my kitchen. Nothing fancy, just scrambled eggs and toast, but I savored every bite. Tomorrow, Luke and Rachel would return from their long weekend at some resort to find the house sold. My room empty, and a letter explaining everything. They thought they knew about Caroline Foster was wrong. I was packed and ready to discover who I really was. The moving truck arrived at 7:00 in the morning on January 31st, its diesel engine rumbling through the quiet neighborhood like a mechanical herald of change. I stood at my bedroom window, fully dressed in traveling clothes, watching the crew of 3 men prepare to load the carefully selected pieces of my life that would accompany me across the Atlantic. Luke and Rachel were still in bed, having returned late the night before from their weekend getaway to some spa resort in Vermont. They'd texted sporadically over the 3 days they were gone, sending photos of couples' massages and gourmet meals, while I systematically dismantled the life they assumed would wait patiently for their return. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they'd been celebrating their future in my house, I'd been securing my own future 3,000 miles away. I met the movers at the front door, my voice barely above a whisper as I directed them to the items I'd marked with bright yellow stickers. My grandmother's china cabinet, the one piece of furniture that held memories too precious to leave behind. A few boxes of books carefully curated from a lifetime of reading. The oil painting Henry had commissioned for our 25th anniversary, a landscape of the lake where we'd spent our honeymoon. "This everything, ma'am?" asked the crew chief, a weathered man named Frank, who moved with the efficiency of someone who'd packed up hundreds of lives. "That's everything," I confirmed, signing the papers that would send my belongings on a cargo ship to France while I flew ahead to receive them. "Storage facility in Nice will hold everything until you're ready for delivery," Frank explained. "Should take about 2 weeks by sea. 2 weeks. By then, I'd be settled in my temporary apartment, sipping coffee on my terrace while Luke and Rachel discovered the full extent of their miscalculation. After the truck pulled away, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if it too was ready to move on to its next chapter. I walked through the empty spaces where my furniture had been, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors I'd polished one last time the night before. Upstairs, I could hear the shower running in the master bedroom that had been mine and Henry's for a quarter century. Rachel was beginning her morning routine, probably unaware that anything had changed. They'd been so confident in their timeline, so certain of my compliance, that it hadn't occurred to them to question the absence of moving boxes or the lack of senior living facility brochures scattered around the house. I made coffee in my empty kitchen, standing at the counter because the breakfast table was already on its way to France. The morning light streamed through windows I'd cleaned for the last time, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny celebrations in the air. My phone buzzed with a text from Celeste in Monaco. "Everything prepared for your arrival. Keys will be waiting at the concierge desk. Welcome to your new adventure." Adventure. The word sent a thrill through me that I hadn't felt since I was young, and the world seemed infinite with possibility. At 68, I was about to embark on the biggest adventure of my life, and the only people who had any claim on my happiness were trying to warehouse me in a facility for people who'd given up on living. The shower upstairs stopped running. Soon Rachel would emerge in her perfectly coordinated workout clothes, and Luke would stumble to the kitchen in search of coffee in the sports section. They'd go through their Saturday morning routine as if nothing had changed, because in their world, nothing had. The inconvenient mother had been managed. The problem had been solved, and their future was clear and unobstructed. I carried my coffee to the living room and sat in the one chair I'd left behind a wingback that had never been comfortable but had sentimental value for Luke. It was where Henry used to read his evening paper, where Luke had sat to open Christmas presents for 20 years. Let them keep it. Let them have all the furniture, all the fixtures, all the physical remnants of the life I was leaving behind. What they couldn't keep was me. Footsteps on the stairs announced Rachel's descent to the kitchen. I heard her pause, probably noticing the absence of the coffee table that had sat in front of the sofa for 15 years, the empty space where my grandmother's china cabinet had displayed 4 generations of family heirlooms. "Carrie," her voice carried a note of confusion. "Did you move some furniture?" I took a sip of coffee and called back. "Just some rearranging. It wasn't technically a lie. I had rearranged things from this house to a cargo ship to a storage facility in Nice. Geography was just another form of interior design. Luke appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, wearing pajama pants and a frown. "Mom, where's all your stuff?" "Gone," I said simply. "Gone where?" "To my new place." He blinked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Your new place, but you haven't moved yet. We agreed on end of the month, and today's the 31st. "You're absolutely right," I said, standing up and smoothing my traveling dress. "Today is the 31st, and I'm leaving for my new place this afternoon." Rachel materialized beside Luke, her face a mask of confusion and growing alarm. "Leaving? What do you mean leaving? We're supposed to tour Sunrise Manor on Monday." "No," I corrected gently. "You assumed I would tour Sunrise Manor on Monday. I never agreed to that." Luke's face was cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Confusion, realization, anger, and back to confusion. "Mom, what's going on? Where are your things? Where are you going?" I walked to the kitchen counter where I'd left 2 envelopes, each one bearing a name written in my careful cursive. I handed them their respective letters and returned to my chair. "Everything you need to know is in there," I said. "But the short version is this. You told me to find my own place, and I did. Monaco." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking away the seconds of their shock. Isabel opened her envelope first, her manicured fingers tearing at the paper with uncharacteristic urgency. Luke followed suit, both of them scanning the pages I'd written the night before, explaining my decision, my timeline, and most importantly, my financial independence. $2.1 million, Luke read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "Plus the house sale," I confirmed. $465,000 after Jennifer's commission. Rachel looked up from her letter, her face pale beneath her perfectly applied makeup. "You sold the house. Closed yesterday," I said. "The Reynoldses seem like lovely people. They're planning to restore the garden to its full glory." "You can't sell this house," Luke said, his voice rising. "It's my inheritance. It's in my name." "Was in your name," I corrected. I had Richard Chen research the legalities. Turns out the transfer for tax purposes wasn't quite as ironclad as you thought. The house was still mine to sell, and I sold it. Luke stared at me like I'd grown a second head. But where will we live?" It was exactly the question I'd expected, and exactly the question that revealed everything wrong with their thinking. Not where would I live, not how would I manage, but where would they live now that their free housing was gone? "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said kindly. "You're both capable adults with good jobs and excellent credit. You'll be fine." "Fine," Rachel's voice cracked on the word. "Carrie, you can't just leave us homeless. We don't have money for a down payment. We've been saving, but with the market the way it is." "You've been saving," I repeated slowly. "For what?" They exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They'd been saving for their own future while living rent-free in my house, eating my food, using my utilities. They'd been treating me like a landlord who didn't charge rent while simultaneously planning to evict me for their convenience. "This is insane," Luke said, standing up and beginning to pace. "Mom, you can't move to Monaco. You don't speak French. You don't know anyone there. What if something happens to you?" "I'll learn French," I said. "I'll meet people. And if something happens to me, at least it will happen while I'm living my life instead of waiting to die in a facility you chose for me." "We never said anything about waiting to die," Rachel protested. "Sunrise Manor is lovely. They have activities, social events, trips to the theater. Organized fun for people whose families think they're too old for real fun," I said. "No, thank you." Luke stopped pacing and turned to face me, his expression shifting into the manipulative sincerity he'd perfected as a teenager when he wanted something. "Mom, please, let's talk about this rationally. You're making a huge mistake. Monaco is expensive, foreign. What if you hate it? What if you want to come home?" "This isn't my home anymore," I said quietly. "You made that very clear." "I never said that. You told me to find my own place. You said this house was yours now. You scheduled interior designers to redecorate before I'd even moved out. I stood up, meeting his eyes. Luke, you evicted me from my own life. Did you really think I'd go quietly? Rachel was frantically scrolling through her phone, probably calculating rental costs and mortgage payments, trying to figure out how quickly their comfortable life was about to become expensive and complicated. How could you do this to us? She demanded, looking up from her phone with tears of fury in her eyes. We trusted you. We made plans based on having this house. You made plans based on having my house, I corrected. Plans that involved discarding me like an inconvenient piece of furniture. Did you really think I'd cooperate with my own erasure? Luke slumped into the wingback chair I'd vacated, his face in his hands. This is unbelievable. My own mother, leaving me homeless. Your own mother, who sacrificed everything to give you a good life, who supported you through college, who helped you with your first car, your wedding, your down payment on that BMW. My voice was getting stronger with each word. 30 years of suppressed frustration finally finding its voice. Your own mother, who you told to find somewhere more appropriate for someone her age. We didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden where I'd planted bulbs that would bloom in spring for someone else to enjoy. You meant exactly like that. I was too old, too messy, too much trouble for your elegant new life. Well, congratulations. Problem solved. My taxi would arrive in 20 minutes to take me to the airport. My suitcases were already in the car, 2 pieces of luggage containing everything I needed to start over on another continent. By tonight, I'd be in my new apartment, looking out at the Mediterranean Sea, breathing air that didn't taste like obligation and disappointment. Where will we go? Rachel whispered, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded genuinely frightened. I'm sure you'll think of something, I says, c'est beau. Young couples are resourceful. Maybe you can stay with your parents while you look for something you can afford. My parents, Rachel's voice climbed an octave, in their guest room. It's temporary, I says, Ned, just until you find your own place, somewhere more appropriate for people your age. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The phrase that had been used to dismiss me was now being reflected back at them, and they clearly didn't like how it felt. Mom, please, Luke said, standing up again. Don't do this. We can work something out. You can stay. We'll find somewhere else to live. It was the first time in months he'd asked me to stay instead of told me to leave, but it was too late. The offer came from desperation, not love, and I'd spent too many years accepting scraps of affection from people who should have cherished me. Luke, I said gently, do you remember what you said when your father died? You promised you'd always take care of me. You said family was everything. His face crumpled. I remember. So do I. Every word. And for 5 years, I believed you meant it. I trusted you with my life, my future, my security. And the first time it became inconvenient, you threw me away. We didn't throw you away. You told me to find my own place, so I did. Monaco is lovely this time of year. A car horn honked outside my taxi, right on schedule. I picked up my purse and the small carry-on bag that contained my passport, my banking information, and a change of clothes for tomorrow. That's my ride, I said. Mom, wait. Luke followed me to the front door, his voice breaking. Please don't go. Not like this. I turned to look at him one last time, memorizing his face, trying to see past the panic to the little boy who used to tell me I was his best friend in the whole world. I love you, Luke, I said. I will always love you, but I won't let you treat me like a burden anymore. I raised you to be better than that. I know, he whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't give me back the months of planning my own disposal. Sorry doesn't erase the feeling of being unwanted in my own home. Rachel appeared behind him, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Carrie, please, we'll do better. We'll change. You'll change because you have to now, I said, because your free ride is over. But I'm not interested in being a lesson in gratitude. I'm interested in being happy. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch I'd swept every weekend for 30 years. The taxi driver was already getting out to help with my bags, a kind-faced woman about my age who smiled like she'd done this 1,000 times before. "Airport," she asked. "Airport," I confirmed. "International terminal." Behind me, I could hear Luke and Rachel talking in urgent whispers, probably trying to figure out if they could stop me somehow. If there was some legal recourse or emotional manipulation they hadn't tried yet. There wasn't. I was 68 years old, mentally competent, financially independent, and legally free to live wherever I chose. The fact that my choice surprised them, inconvenienced them, or hurt their feelings was unfortunate, but irrelevant. "Ma'am," the taxi driver was holding the car door open. "Ready?" I took one last look at the house where I'd been happy for 30 years and miserable for the last 18 months. The Reynoldses would move in next week and fill it with new love, new laughter, new memories. Luke and Rachel would find somewhere else to live and hopefully learn to value what they had instead of taking it for granted. And I would be in Monaco, discovering what came after a lifetime of putting everyone else's needs before my own. "Ready," I says, and climbed into the car. As we pulled away from the curb, I saw Luke in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway of what used to be my house, his shoulders shaking with what might have been tears or rage or simple disbelief. Rachel was on her phone, probably calling her parents to negotiate emergency housing while they figured out what to do next. I felt a moment of sadness for the pain I was causing them, but it was a clean sadness, uncomplicated by guilt or regret. They had created this situation with their entitlement and casual cruelty. I was simply declining to be their victim. "Big trip?" the taxi driver asked as we merged onto the highway toward the airport. "New life," I said. "Good for you," she said, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. "Sometimes you gotta shake things up, even when people don't like it." Especially when people don't like it, I thought, but kept the observation to myself. The airport was busy for a Tuesday afternoon, full of travelers with their own destinations and their own reasons for leaving one place to find another. I checked in for my flight to Nice, handed over my passport like a veteran international traveler, and made my way through security with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was going. At the gate, I called Olivia to let her know I'd made it this far. "How did they take it?" she asked. "About as well as you'd expect," I said. "Shock, anger, disbelief, panic, and a lot of questions about where they're going to live now." "Good," Olivia said firmly. "Let them figure it out. Maybe it'll teach them some appreciation." Maybe. "Are you okay?" Second thoughts. I looked around the gate area at families saying goodbye, business travelers typing on laptops, and young couples planning adventures together. Everyone going somewhere. Everyone carrying hopes and dreams and the assumption that the world would arrange itself around their needs. "No second thoughts," I said. "Only first thoughts about what comes next. I'm proud of you, Caroline Foster." "I'm proud of me too." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and checked my email. A message from Celeste with final arrival instructions and the concierge's contact information. A note from Richard Chen confirming that my international wire transfers had gone through successfully. An automated notification from my bank that my credit cards had been activated for international use. Everything was in place. Everything was ready. I was ready. The boarding announcement came at 4:00 sharp. Flight 407 to Nice. Now boarding first-class passengers and those needing assistance. I gathered my things and joined the line. My boarding pass marking me as Seat 2A first-class window seat. Another luxury I'd never allowed myself. Another small rebellion against the idea that people my age should be grateful for whatever accommodation they were offered. As the plane lifted off from the runway, I pressed my face to the window and watched my old life shrink into geometric patterns of roads and rooftops and tiny cars carrying people to their own destinations. Somewhere down there, Luke and Rachel were probably still arguing about what to do next, still trying to process the reality that their convenient arrangement had just vanished into thin air. But that was their problem now. I had my own life to live, my own adventure to begin, my own future to discover in a place where no one knew anything about me except that I was brave enough to start over. The flight attendant appeared with champagne service, offering crystal flutes filled with bubbles that caught the afternoon light like liquid gold. "Celebrating something special?" she asked with a professional smile. "Freedom," I said, accepting the glass. "I'm celebrating freedom." 8 hours later, the plane began its descent into Nice Côte d'Azur Airport, and I got my first glimpse of the Mediterranean coastline in the early morning light. The water was impossibly blue, dotted with white boats that looked like toys from this height. The coastline curved like a painting, all red roofs and green hills and golden beaches that promised warmth even in February. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said the man sitting next to me, a businessman who'd slept through most of the flight. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. The airport was smaller than I'd expected, more efficient, and less chaotic than the American airports I was used to. My passport was stamped with a courtesy that felt European. My luggage appeared without drama. And within an hour of landing, I was in a taxi heading east along the coast toward Monaco. The drive was like something from a movie. Winding roads that hugged the coastline, views that changed around every curve, hillside towns that looked like they'd been painted by artists with unlimited imaginations. The taxi driver, a cheerful man named Philippe, kept up a running commentary in accented English about the sights we were passing. "First time in Monaco?" he asked. "First time anywhere, really," I said. "I've never traveled much." "Ah, but Monaco is perfect place to start. Very international, very beautiful. You will love it, I think." As we crested a hill and Monaco spread out below us, I knew he was right. The harbor was filled with yachts that looked like floating palaces, their white hulls gleaming in the morning sun. The buildings climbed the hillsides in terraces of cream and pink and gold, and everything sparkled like a jewelry box open to catch the light. "Where are you staying?" Philippe asked. I gave him the address on Avenue Saint-Charles, and he nodded approvingly. "Very nice location, close to everything but quiet. Good choice." The building was exactly as beautiful as it had appeared in the photograph Celeste had sent. Belle Époque architecture with wrought iron balconies and tall windows that promised light and air and views that would never get old. The concierge was waiting with my keys and a smile that seemed genuinely welcoming. "Madame Foster," he said in excellent English. "Welcome to Monaco. I am Henri. If you need anything at all, please do not hesitate to ask." "Thank you, Henri. Your apartment is on the 4th floor. The elevator is just here. I trust you will be very comfortable." The elevator was small and elegant, with mirrors and brass fixtures that belonged in a palace. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, I found myself in a hallway with marble floors and crystal sconces that cast warm light on cream-colored walls. Apartment 4B was at the end of the hall, and when I opened the door with my new keys, I stepped into a life I'd never dared to imagine for myself. The apartment was flooded with morning light from windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The furniture was elegant, but comfortable antiques mixed with modern pieces in shades of cream and gold and soft blue. But it was the terrace that took my breath away. I walked through the French doors and stepped onto a wraparound balcony that offered a panoramic view of the Mediterranean. The water stretched to the horizon, deep blue and glittering with sunlight. Below, the harbor was coming to life with the morning activities of people who called this paradise home. I stood there for a long time, breathing air that tasted like salt and possibility, listening to the gentle sounds of a city waking up in a language I didn't yet understand but wanted to learn. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Mom, please call. We need to talk." I read Luke's message twice, then deleted it without responding. We'd had our talk. They'd told me what they thought of my place in their lives, and I'd responded accordingly. Whatever they needed to say now would have to wait until I was ready to hear it, if that day ever came. Instead, I called Celeste to let her know I'd arrived safely. "Welcome to Monaco, Madame Foster," she said warmly. "How do you find the apartment?" "It's perfect," I said, looking out at the view that would greet me every morning for as long as I chose to stay. "Absolutely perfect. I am so pleased, and please do not hesitate to call if you need anything. Recommendations for restaurants, assistance with shopping, anything at all." "Thank you. I think I'm going to love it here." "I think so too," Celeste said. "You have chosen a wonderful place for a new beginning." "A new beginning At 68, when most people my age were supposedly settling into rocking chairs and early bird dinners, I was beginning the greatest adventure of my life in one of the most beautiful places on Earth. Luke had told me to find my own place, and I had a place where no one would ever again suggest that I needed somewhere more appropriate for someone my age. A place where I could discover who Caroline Foster really was when she wasn't busy being convenient for everyone else. I unpacked my few belongings, arranged my grandmother's photo on the antique writing desk, and made my first cup of coffee in my new kitchen. Then I carried it out to the terrace and sat down to watch the sun climb higher over the Mediterranean, painting the water in shades of blue I'd never seen before. Somewhere thousands of miles away, Luke and Rachel were probably still trying to figure out what had happened to their carefully laid plans. They'd learned to adapt, to manage their own lives without using me as a safety net. They might even learn to appreciate what they had instead of taking it for granted. But that was their journey to make. I had my own path to follow now. And it started with this moment, this view, this feeling of being exactly where I belonged. I raised my coffee cup in a small toast to the morning, to the sea, to the courage it had taken to choose myself. To new beginnings, I said aloud. And in the distance, a seagull cried back, as if the whole Mediterranean was welcoming me home. 3 months into my Mediterranean life, I woke to the sound of seagulls and the gentle lapping of waves against the harbor wall 4 stories below. Morning light streamed through the gauzy curtains of my bedroom, casting dancing shadows on the herringbone floors that had become as familiar as breathing. I stretched like a cat, luxuriating in the simple pleasure of waking up naturally instead of to an alarm clock, of having nowhere to be except exactly where I wanted to be. My French was improving daily. What had started as tentative pointing and apologetic smiling had evolved into actual conversations with shopkeepers, restaurant servers, and my neighbors in the building. The language had not come easily. I struggled with pronunciation and often mixed up tenses, but the effort was bringing unexpected rewards, including a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. Juliette Beaumont from apartment 3A had taken me under her wing, a retired philosophy professor who spoke 5 languages and made the most extraordinary cocoa I'd ever tasted. She'd invited me to her weekly salon where a rotating group of expatriates and locals gathered to discuss everything from politics to poetry over wine and cheese that tasted like small miracles. "Caroline," she'd said during our first real conversation, "you have done something very brave. Not many people have the courage to choose themselves at our age." Our age. Coming from Juliette, who was 74 and still traveled solo to archaeological digs in Greece, the phrase sounded like a badge of honor rather than a limitation. I'd established routines that felt both foreign and perfectly natural. Morning coffee on the terrace while watching the harbor come alive. A walk along the coastal path that stretched between Monaco and Cap d'Aille, where the Mediterranean spread out like a bolt of silk in every direction. Afternoons spent reading in the shade of the palm trees in the Japanese garden, or browsing the outdoor market, where vendors called out greetings in French and English and Italian, creating a symphony of international commerce. The apartment had filled with small treasures collected during my explorations. A watercolor of the harbor painted by a local artist, ceramic bowls from the market in Nice, books in both English and French from the wonderful bookshop on Rue Grimaldi. My grandmother's china cabinet had arrived from storage and now displayed a mix of family heirlooms and new discoveries, creating a bridge between my old life and my new one. But it was the silence from home that had been the most telling indicator of how completely my world had changed. In 3 months, I'd received exactly 4 communications from Luke, 2 frantic phone calls during the first week, both going to voicemail because I wasn't ready to have that conversation. A long email in February full of apologies and explanations and requests for me to come home and work things out, and a birthday card in March, 2 weeks late, with a generic message about hoping I was well. The birthday card had arrived on a day when I was feeling particularly settled in my new life. I'd spent the morning at a watercolor class taught by an English artist who'd been living in Monaco for 20 years. She was my age, vibrant and funny, with paint-stained fingers and stories of a life lived entirely on her own terms. After the divorce, she told us, I sold everything and moved to France with 2 suitcases and a determination to discover who I was when I wasn't being someone's wife. Best decision I ever made, she'd said, dabbing cerulean blue onto her canvas with the confidence of someone who'd found her calling. Took me 65 years to realize I was the only one responsible for my happiness. The birthday card from Luke had felt like an artifact from a previous life, a reminder of obligations I no longer carried. I'd read it once, felt a brief pang of sadness for the relationship we might have had, and then placed it in a drawer where it couldn't disturb the peace I'd worked so hard to build. My phone rang as I was finishing my morning coffee, the sound still startling in the tranquil quiet of my terrace. The number was international, but not one I recognized, though something about the country code seemed familiar. Caroline Foster, I answered, a habit I'd developed since moving to Monaco. It felt important to claim my full name, to announce myself to the world as a complete person rather than someone's mother or daughter-in-law. Mom. The voice was thin, stretched across an ocean and what felt like years of accumulated misunderstanding. Luke sounded older somehow, worn down in a way that transcended the poor connection. Hello? Luke? Mom, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your old number was disconnected, and I had to hire someone to track down your new information. He'd hired someone. The phrase hung between us, like an admission of how far apart we'd drifted. He'd paid a stranger to find his own mother rather than simply respecting my need for space. I've been here, I said simply, living my life. In Monaco. His voice carried a weight I couldn't quite identify. Not disapproval exactly, but something close to awe mixed with disbelief. In Monaco. Mom, we need to talk, really talk. Things have been difficult since you left. I sat down my coffee cup and watched a yacht navigate the harbor entrance, its white hull cutting through water that sparkled like scattered diamonds. Difficult. I wondered what that meant in Luke's vocabulary now that he was responsible for his own housing, his own utilities, his own future. What's happened, I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. There was a long pause filled with the crackling static of international communication and what sounded like Luke gathering courage for whatever he needed to say. Rachel left, he said finally. The words should have shocked me, but instead I felt only a mild curiosity about the details. Rachel had been the architect of my exile, the one who'd convinced Luke that I was too inconvenient for their elegant lifestyle. That she'd abandoned ship when their circumstances changed was entirely predictable. When 6 weeks ago, she went back to her parents, said she couldn't handle the stress of our situation. Our situation. I could read between those carefully chosen words. They'd been forced to rent an apartment they couldn't really afford, to live within their actual means instead of supplementing their lifestyle with my resources. Rachel, who'd been so confident about her ability to curate their perfect life, had discovered that perfection was expensive when you had to pay for it yourself. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Not sorry that Rachel was gone, but sorry that Luke was learning these lessons about love and loyalty the hard way. Are you? His voice carried a bitter edge. Sorry, you never liked her. It was true, but not for the reasons he probably thought. I hadn't disliked Rachel because she was wrong for him or because she wasn't good enough for my son. I disliked her because she treated me like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. I'm sorry you're in pain, I said carefully. Breakups are never easy. We're not broken up, not yet. She says she needs time to think, but her lawyer already contacted mine about separating our assets. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turns out we don't have many assets to separate. Of course they didn't. They'd been living beyond their means for years, using my house as collateral for a lifestyle they couldn't sustain independently. Now that the foundation had been removed, the whole structure had collapsed. Where are you living? A 1-bedroom apartment in Riverdale. It's all I can afford with just my salary and the debt we accumulated. Another pause. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I know I don't have the right. Here it comes. I thought the request for financial assistance, for a loan to tide him over until he could get back on his feet. The assumption that despite everything that had happened, I would still be available to solve his problems. You can ask, I said, but I may not be able to help. I don't want money, he said quickly. Well, I could use money, but that's not why I'm calling. I want to understand. I need to understand what I did that was so terrible that you had to disappear to another continent to get away from me. The question caught me off guard with its raw honesty. I'd expected manipulation or guilt or anger, but not this genuine confusion about the consequences of his choices. You told me to find my own place, I said. I know, but I didn't mean... we were trying to help you transition to something more manageable. More manageable for whom? Silence. Luke, do you remember what you said about people my age, about how I needed somewhere more appropriate with organized activities and other seniors? We were trying to look out for your well-being. No, I said firmly. You were trying to clear me out of your way. There's a difference. I could hear him breathing across the connection, and I wondered where he was calling from. His cramped apartment, his office during a lunch break, some public place where he'd finally worked up the courage to have this conversation. You're right, he said finally. We were selfish. I was selfish. I convinced myself that we were doing what was best for you. But really, we were doing what was easiest for us. It was the first real acknowledgement I'd heard from him, the first admission that my feelings and my autonomy had been casualties of their convenience. Why are you calling me now? Luke? Because I miss you, he said, and his voice broke on the words. Because I've spent the last 3 months realizing how much of my life was built on the assumption that you would always be there to catch me when I fell. And because I want to know if there's any way I can earn your forgiveness. Forgiveness. I turned the word over in my mind like a stone I'd found on the beach, examining its weight and texture. 3 months ago, I'd been furious, hurt, determined to prove that Caroline Foster was more than a convenient safety net for other people's dreams. Now, sitting on my terrace overlooking one of the most beautiful harbors in the world, surrounded by a life I had built entirely for myself. The anger felt like something that belonged to a different person, not because what Luke had done was acceptable, but because I no longer needed his validation to know my own worth. What would forgiveness look like to you? I asked. I don't know. A conversation. Maybe. A chance to apologize properly. To tell you how proud I am of what you've done. Even if it scares the hell out of me. Proud, that was a word I hadn't expected. Scared, Mom, you sold everything and moved to Monaco. At 68, most people our parents' age are worried about their medication schedules, and you're living in the most expensive place in Europe like some kind of international woman of mystery. I laughed, surprising myself. Is that how you see me, an international woman of mystery? I see you as someone I clearly never understood, he said. Someone who was stronger and braver than I ever gave you credit for. Someone who deserved better from me. The admission hung between us, honest and painful and real. I thought about the months of planning my own disposal, the casual cruelty of being discarded like a burden, the assumption that I would be grateful for whatever scraps of consideration they threw my way. But I also thought about the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd made me Mother's Day cards from construction paper and glitter, who'd cried when he broke my favorite vase and spent his allowance on flowers to apologize. Luke, I said slowly, I don't need your apology to be happy. I'm happy now, genuinely happy in a way I haven't been since your father died. I have friends here, activities I enjoy, a life that belongs entirely to me. I know. I can hear it in your voice. You sound different. Lighter. I am lighter. I'm not carrying anyone else's expectations anymore. I'm not trying to be convenient or unobtrusive or appropriately aged. I'm just being myself. Will you tell me about it? Your life there. So I did. I told him about my morning walks along the coastal path, about the watercolor classes and the weekly salons at Juliet's apartment. I described the view from my terrace, the way the light changed throughout the day, the international community of expatriates who'd all chosen adventure over comfort. There's a woman here named Sophia, I said, who sold her accounting practice in London and moved here to become a sculptor. She's 71 and just had her first gallery showing. And Jean-Claude, who was a banker in Paris until he retired and decided to open a small bistro where he serves exactly 4 dishes every day. Perfectly prepared. It sounds incredible. It is incredible. It's also challenging and sometimes lonely and occasionally terrifying. But it's mine. Luke, every choice, every risk, every small triumph belongs to me. I took that away from you, he said quietly. Your choices. You tried to, but ultimately, I'm the one who chose to leave. You gave me the push I needed to stop living my life for other people. There was another long pause, and I could almost feel him processing this reframing of our story. He'd called expecting to find a bitter, lonely woman who needed rescuing from her own poor decisions. Instead, he'd found someone who'd used his rejection as a launching pad for the best years of her life. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. Are you ever coming back? The question I'd been asking myself for 3 months. My apartment lease was month to month, my life deliberately temporary while I figured out what permanent looked like. I had enough money to buy property here, to put down roots in Monaco soil, but I hadn't made that commitment yet. I don't know, I said honestly. This doesn't feel temporary anymore, but it doesn't feel permanent either. I'm still discovering what I want my life to look like. If you did come back, would you want to see me if I came back? Seeing you would be the only reason. He was crying now. I could hear it in the rhythm of his breathing, in the way his voice had gone thick and uncertain. I love you, Mom. I know I did a terrible job of showing it, but I do love you. I love you too, sweetheart. I always have, and I always will. But love isn't enough if it's not paired with respect. I know. I'm learning that the hard way. Learning is good. Growth is good. Maybe this is what you needed too, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. We talked for another half hour, filling in the details of our separate lives. He told me about his job, which he was throwing himself into with new determination now that it was his only source of security, about the small apartment that was teaching him to live within his means, about the loneliness that came with realizing how much of his social life had been built around Rachel's connections and preferences. I told him about my French lessons, about the cooking class I'd joined where I was learning to make proper bouillabaisse, about the book club that met at the English language bookstore, where we'd spent 2 hours last week debating the merits of contemporary French literature. When we finally said goodbye, something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. He was beginning to comprehend the scope of what he'd lost when he dismissed me so casually, and I was discovering that my happiness didn't require his suffering. After the call ended, I sat on my terrace for a long time, watching the afternoon light paint the harbor in shades of golden amber. A text message from Olivia arrived as I was contemplating dinner plans. How are you, world traveler? The neighborhood isn't the same without you. I typed back, thriving, learning French and how to make friends at 68. How's the new family in my house? Lovely people. Ellie asked me for the name of whoever did your garden design. I told her it was just you with love and 30 years of patience. Just me. The phrase made me smile. For so long, I'd thought of myself in relation to other people: Henry's wife, Luke's mother, Rachel's inconvenient obstacle. But here in Monaco, I was simply Caroline Foster, watercolor student and French language learner, terrace gardener and amateur philosopher. That evening, I walked to my favorite restaurant, a small place tucked into a side street where the owner, Michel, greeted regular customers like family. He'd reserved my usual table on the tiny terrace, where I could watch the last of the day's light fade over the Mediterranean while enjoying whatever Michel recommended from his ever-changing menu. Madame Caroline, he said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Comment allez-vous? I replied, pleased that the response came automatically now. Très bien, tonight, I have something special for you. Fresh langoustines just arrived this afternoon, with a light saffron sauce and some local vegetables. It sounds perfect. As I settled into my chair with a glass of crisp white wine, I reflected on how much my definition of perfect had changed. 3 months ago, perfect meant managing everyone else's expectations while minimizing my own needs. Now it meant langoustines and saffron sauce eaten while watching the sunset over water that stretched to infinity. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from an unknown number. Mrs. Foster, this is Eleanor Reynolds. We bought your house in January. I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but I wanted you to know that your roses are coming up beautifully. The garden is even more spectacular than we imagined it would be. Thank you for creating something so beautiful for us to inherit." I stared at the message, unexpected tears blurring my vision. My roses, planted with such hope for the future, were blooming for someone who appreciated their beauty. The Reynoldses were discovering the cycles I'd begun, adding their own touches while respecting what had come before. I typed back, "Thank you for telling me. Gardens are meant to be loved. I'm so happy they're in your hands." Within minutes, another message arrived. "Would you mind if I sent you photos, and if you have any advice about the herb garden? I'd be grateful. I'm trying to learn what you clearly mastered." For the next hour, as my langoustines arrived and the stars began to appear over Monaco, I exchanged messages with the woman who now lived in my former house. She sent pictures of spring bulbs emerging from the soil I'd prepared, of the herb garden responding to her careful attention, of the climbing roses I'd trained along the back fence beginning to show their first buds. It was like receiving news from a beloved friend, proof that the love I'd invested in that place hadn't disappeared when I left. The Reynoldses were nurturing what I'd begun, adding their own vision while respecting the foundation I'd created. As I walked home along the harbor, my stomach pleasantly full and my heart lighter than it had been in months, I thought about the strange circularity of life. Luke's rejection had forced me to discover my own strength. My departure had taught him the value of what he'd taken for granted. The house I'd loved and lost was being cherished by people who understood its worth. Nothing had worked out as anyone had planned, but somehow everything had worked out as it needed to. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Luke. "My dear son, thank you for calling today. It meant more than you know to hear your voice and to know that you're learning to build a life on your own foundation. I've been thinking about what you asked about forgiveness and whether there's a path forward for us. The truth is, I forgave you weeks ago not because what you did was acceptable, but because carrying anger was weighing down my new life. You were thoughtless and hurtful, but you were also operating from assumptions about aging and family and obligation that our culture teaches us without question. I don't know if I'll move back to the States, but I do know that geography isn't what's been keeping us apart. If you want a relationship with me, it needs to be built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not convenience or obligation. I'm not your safety net anymore. Luke." But I'd like to be your friend. I'm proud of you for facing the consequences of your choices without blaming anyone else. I'm proud of you for asking the hard questions about your own behavior. And I'm hopeful that we can build something new together, something based on who we actually are, rather than who we think we're supposed to be. With love from Monaco, where your mother is learning that life doesn't end at 68, it just gets more interesting. Mom, I read the email twice before sending it, making sure every word was true, that I wasn't offering more than I was ready to give or less than he deserved for his honesty. 6 months later, Luke came to visit. He'd saved for months to afford the trip, staying in a modest hotel near the port and spending his days exploring Monaco with the wide-eyed wonder of someone seeing the world through fresh eyes. "I can't believe this is your life," he said on his second day as we sat on my terrace sharing a lunch I'd prepared with vegetables from the local market and fish so fresh it had probably been swimming that morning. "Some days I can't believe it either," I admitted, "but it feels real now. It feels like home." He'd changed in the months since our phone call, not just physically, though he was thinner and looked like he'd been sleeping poorly. There was something different in his manner, a humility that hadn't been there before, a carefulness in how he spoke that suggested he was thinking before reacting. "I've been in therapy," he said without my asking, "trying to understand how I became someone who could treat you the way I did. What have you learned? That I inherited Dad's sense of entitlement without his work ethic, that I confused loving you with owning you, that I never really thought of you as a separate person with your own needs and dreams." It was a more thorough self-assessment than I'd expected and more honest than I'd dared to hope for. "And Rachel?" "Gone for good. The divorce was finalized last month." He shrugged, but I could see the lingering hurt in his eyes. "Turns out she loved our lifestyle more than she loved me, when I couldn't provide the lifestyle anymore. I'm sorry. I'm not Really, it hurts, but it also clarifies things. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who sees me as a means to an end. We spent the week rebuilding our relationship on new terms. I showed him my favorite places, introduced him to my friends, let him see the life I'd built for myself. He was genuinely curious about everything, asking thoughtful questions about my choices, my daily routines, my plans for the future. On his last night, we had dinner at Michelle's restaurant, where Luke struggled gamely with his high school French and charmed the staff with his willingness to try dishes he couldn't pronounce. "I have something to tell you," he said over dessert, a local specialty that combined honey and almonds and tradition in equal measure. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news, I think. I've been offered a promotion regional manager for the Southeast. It would mean relocating to Atlanta. Better money. Real responsibility." "That's wonderful. You should be proud." "I am. But it also means I'd be even further away from you if you decided to come back to the States." I smiled at the careful way he'd phrased it, not assuming my decisions, but acknowledging their potential impact on his life. "Luke, I need you to understand something. I'm not coming back to take care of you. I'm not coming back to be convenient or available or appropriately aged. If I come back and it's still an if, it will be because I choose to. For my own reasons. I know. I'm not asking you to come back for me. I'm just saying that I hope geography doesn't mean we can't keep building this new relationship we've started." "Technology exists," I pointed out, "and airplanes. We don't have to live in the same zip code to be part of each other's lives." "Is that what you want, to be part of each other's lives?" I looked at my son across the table. This man I'd raised and loved and lost and found again. He wasn't the little boy who'd once told me I was his best friend. But he wasn't the entitled young man who'd told me to find my own place either. He was someone new, someone shaped by consequences and loss and the slow work of growing up. "Yes," I said, on equal terms, with mutual respect and genuine affection. But yes. The relief on his face was so profound it made my chest ache. As I drove him to the airport the next morning, we talked about practical things, his new job, my ongoing French lessons, the possibility of him visiting again at Christmas. But underneath the logistics was something deeper, a recognition that we'd both changed in fundamental ways. That the people saying goodbye at the departure gate were different from the ones who'd fought in my kitchen all those months ago. "Thank you," he said as we hugged goodbye at security. "For what?" "For showing me that love doesn't mean accepting poor treatment. For teaching me that people your age aren't just waiting around to die. For proving that it's never too late to choose yourself." I watched him disappear into the international terminal, carrying lessons learned the hard way and a new understanding of what family could mean when it was built on choice rather than obligation. That afternoon, I sat on my terrace with a glass of wine and my laptop, reviewing an email from a real estate agent in Monaco. I'd been looking at apartments to purchase, ready to make my temporary adventure permanent. The one that had caught my eye was in a newer building with a rooftop garden and panoramic views of both the sea and the mountains that rose behind the principality. It was more expensive than my current rental, but I could afford it comfortably with the proceeds from my house sale and the income from my investments. More importantly, it felt like home in a way that nowhere had since Henry died. I was about to respond to the real estate agent when my phone rang. Olivia's number appeared on the screen, and I answered with the automatic smile that her calls always brought. "Caroline Foster, International Woman of Mystery," she said without preamble. "How was the visit with Luke?" "Complicated but good," I said. "We're different people than we were 6 months ago." People can change given the right motivation, apparently. "So how are things in the old neighborhood?" "Quiet. The Reynoldses are throwing a garden party next month to show off all the work they've been doing. They specifically asked me to invite you if you're ever back in town." "That's sweet of them. Is there any chance you might be back in town?" It was the question everyone kept asking, the one I'd been avoiding answering definitively because I hadn't been ready to close that door permanently. "Olivia," I said slowly, "what if I told you I was thinking about staying here permanently? What if I said that at 68? I'd found the place where I want to spend whatever years I have left. I'd say it was about damn time Caroline Foster put herself first." Olivia replied without hesitation. "And I'd ask when I could come visit this paradise you've discovered." I laughed. feeling something settle in my chest like a key finding its lock. How's next month I'm thinking about buying an apartment with a guest room that has an ocean view? Book me a flight, Olivia said. It's about time I had an adventure too. After we hung up, I opened the email to the real estate agent and typed my response. I'd like to schedule a viewing for tomorrow morning. I'm ready to make an offer. As the sun set over Monaco for what might have been the 1,000th time since I arrived, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. Luke's demand that I find my own place had been meant as a dismissal, a convenient way to clear me out of his path. Instead, it had been the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. I'd found my own place. All right, not in a senior living facility where I could be managed and contained, but in one of the most beautiful places on earth, where every day brought new possibilities and every sunset promised another tomorrow to fill as I chose. At 68, I'd learned that life doesn't end when your children don't need you anymore. It doesn't end when your spouse dies or when people start referring to your age like a limitation. It ends only when you stop believing in your own capacity for joy, for growth, for adventure. I'd almost made that mistake. I'd almost let other people's limited vision of what my life should look like become my reality. But sometimes when you're brave enough to choose yourself, the universe responds with opportunities you never dreamed possible. Monaco had been waiting for me all along. I just needed to be pushed off the cliff of other people's expectations to discover I could fly. Tomorrow, I would look at an apartment with a terrace that overlooked the harbor and mountains that caught the morning light like a painting. I would imagine my grandmother's china cabinet in the living room, my books on the built-in shelves, my morning coffee routine unfolding in a kitchen that would be mine for as long as I chose to stay. Tonight, I would fall asleep to the sound of the Mediterranean lapping against the shore, in a bed I'd chosen, in a life I'd built, in a place where Caroline Foster was exactly who she was meant to be. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and if you enjoyed my story, you'll find 2 other stories that are channel favorites right on your screen now.